Welcome everyone to ZSides. I am your host, Jakiva Phillips. I am the editor-in-chief of WordlitZine, the magazine this show is based off of. So in ZSides, we showcase artists. We have them read for you, we get down to real talk with interviews, and best of all, we even play a nerdy game or two. So are you ready? Up next is the second part of the two-part segment called Hugo House, Now and Then. We're going to be sitting down with founder of Hugo House, Miss Frances McCue, and I am so excited to see what she has in store. Let's check it out.
Okay, I'm going to read to you a few poems from my new book. It's called Timber Curtain, and it accompanies the film Where the House Was. First, I'm going to read you a definition of timber curtain. This is a dictionary entry that I made up. Timber curtain, noun, 1. The name given to a line of trees left after a logging sweep. Origins, Pacific Northwest, mid to late 20th century. Strung along the long roads of the Olympic Peninsula, the lines of trees were left to block sight lines of the clear cuts. 2. Urban version. Facades, rhyming with lobotomies. The use of facades of old buildings as decorative curtains for new, less ornate, and often cheaply made structures. This is a poetry book about the loss of the old Richard Hugo House, about Richard Hugo, and about my own search for a place in a quickly erased city. Gentrification wedge. To us, this part of the hill felt like the suburbs, these cheap apartments and warehouse blocks just off downtown. The dark corridors we found our ways into, the building once a mortuary where people said rosaries over caskets in the chapel, and open wakes took place in the living room, where college kids took calls to pick up bodies, and it was all we could think about later, when the place was a theater that smelled like beer. It was an ashtray. It was perfect. So we came into beer and ashes and believed in the stage where we put poets and tellers of tales we'd all need to hear, while the city whispered on, planning to suffocate one thing after another. When you are young, you find what's overlooked, and you build there. This next poem is called Call It an Interest. The disruption of disintegrating things, any place on its way to becoming a ruin. Imagine driving up to the face of sentimentality and waving. Maybe this building should go. What else to do when something is dying? You say, finally, let it. This city block now slated for tear down, it's not your childhood, not you, that building. Every sentimentalist for miles says, my heart is in that place, and no, don't make another thing go away. Don't erase and replace places we didn't know we loved. It's just this. An old Victorian with a plywood cube nailed on. As the sign goes up, we see what's to come down, in city speak. Soon enough, someone tags the sign, indigenous-like, marks that might be Salish for don't take one more thing away. It's not memory that lasts, but the terrain, old land, claimed and staked and stolen, old. Conquest taunts the bulldozer, nose up, claws grasping, heading into it. And the last poem I will read is called Farewell, Finally, Hugo. From the demolition, everything lifts. A stanza, gone now. Powder. Finally, I suppose it's a relief. Wouldn't it, for 100 years, fall finally down? The mill, the house, or the unrolling of the stacks high above the town, collapsing now. From the stones and boards we push memory up, rubbish, lumber, salt. For what accumulates, how could we not be grateful? We redact, we cut back, and always more remains. From a city alive with cranes, longing fell around us. What I ached for, I couldn't reach. Not my life there, not our family as it was. So goes the mill and the house where memory resolves itself in gaze. The comings and goings buried inside, and the almost fit of it. The way projections slip. We lose, or we think we lose, and mourn the old spots. The tables, the stage. My palm is still turned up. We love places and have to let them go. We are all, and none of us, Richard Hugo. Thank you.
All right, now I am here with Frances McCue. Frances, hello and welcome to ZSides. Thank you so
much for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for being here.
I love
it. So, you're an old friend, and we haven't connected in a while. What have you been up to?
Well, let's see. Writing a lot, reading a lot. So I have part of my life where I'm really inside, huddled over a computer or books, and then I teach, and I fell in love. So I go back and forth to Ireland a lot.
Oh.
Yeah, so my friends are like, where are you? Are you
like
writing like a novel or something where you hold up somewhere? So I have a lot going on.
I think it's interesting that being a writer, you would like fall in love with an Irishman because
How convenient.
I know Ireland is such a literary place.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well, I'm happy you're in love, and you get to go to Ireland on top of it. That's like a bonus.
Yes, I feel like for a long time I've just written griefy stuff, and so now I'm writing like kind of funnier, I don't know, weird stuff. So, you know, I'm finishing kind of a travel memoir about living in Morocco. And I think I'm about ready to leave Richard Hugo behind, finally.
Yeah.
I think I should have like some kind of little thing where I just go, goodbye, Richard Hugo, because I spent a lot of my life writing and talking about Hugo.
That is very true. And but you are one of the founders of Hugo House, and I think that that's something that's always going to be, at least in Seattle, that's always going to be something people associate you with, because we love the Hugo House. We love sort of the mama who created Hugo House.
I'm so glad that people love it. I'm kind of in awe of that. And, you know, I think with our quickly changing city, I think about Richard Hugo a lot, even though I've been away from Hugo House for like 10 or 12 years. It's been a long time. But Hugo was this kind of paunchy former Boeing worker and a bombardier during World War II. And he wrote about overlooked people and places. And it just seemed like the right kind of triggering town to start a place named after him. That said, I feel like sometimes people think of me as Frances McHugo or something. Like, you know, like I'm going to channel the old guy and speak on his behalf, when in fact, the magic here is that I never knew him. And I never met him, and I never studied with him. So I guess my discovery of him went along with everyone else's. Yeah. So it's been wild, and I just went to the opening of the new building, and I was surprisingly moved by it.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing.
Did you see, so at the front bar area, like you'll notice that all the wood that they have at the bar is all the old wood from Hugo House. Because I remember I was looking at it, and I was like, I saw names scribbled on it and stuff, because when the old Hugo House is being torn down, people wrote all over the walls, and so they kept some of that.
I know.
That's good. So you said you were moved by it. Did it just feel, did it feel alien to walk into that space, or was it still like walking home?
Well, it kind of was both. You know how when you find out some place you used to live was torn down? Have you had that happen?
Yes.
Yeah, it's brutal, right? Like you're like,
weird.
Oh wow, that's a shift in how I even perceive space. So anyway, I lived in that house for a while, and I lived upstairs while all the readings and everything went on downstairs. So I had a really intimate sense in that building. And here it was, this old funeral home with ghosts and crazy stuff went on there.
Oh,
And
we're gonna get back to the ghosts.
okay, and like people who were living there that weren't supposed to be living there. I mean, a lot of stuff went on in that old house. And so when it came down, I felt like part of my own history was going to go away, and I was tortured. And so that's why I made this new film called Where the House Was, because I wanted to, you know, I hired a drone to watch the teardown and the whole deal. And so when the new building went up, I was like, And then I went in, and it was like the sight lines in the theater, when you look out the window, they're still the same. Like you still see the same old house across the street, or when you go in the door, you feel that threshold moment like you're walking into the old house. And I thought, wow, this isn't about loss, this is about transformation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. When I was talking to Rob, he gave me a tour of the place for Lit Crawl and also for ZSides. And one of the things that really struck me when I was there was that it's new, it's modern, but it still has that exact same feel, that same gung-ho spirit.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you may be modernizing yourself, but you're not necessarily changing who you are, which always feels good to walk into that kind of thing.
So cool.
Right?
It's kind of like, you know, you buy a cast iron skillet and stuff isn't going to taste that good for a while, you know, like you got to season it.
You got to wait till it gets old.
Basically, a lot of people have to spill a lot of beer on the floor, and then it'll start to have that vibe. You know?
I like that. A lot of people got to spill beer on the floor first.
Yeah.
So, really quickly, before we get into the ghosts, first I want you to tell me what was sort of the origin story of Hugo? Why that house? How did you get started? Like, what sparked the interest to create a Hugo House?
Well, boy, that's a winding and crazy story, but basically, I had a student at UW who I later worked with on an independent study, and her name was Linda Brenneman. Her name then was Linda Jake, and she was interested in a little reading series that my friends and I were doing here in Seattle called the Rendezvous Room Reading Series. And
like the Rendezvous in Belltown?
Yeah,
nice.
That's where it was, and it happened in those, you know, that silk-lined screening room from the 40s.
Yeah,
and
the Jewel Box Theater.
The Jewel Box Theater, right on. And so, you know, it was kind of scruffy. It was like sometimes there'd be like people like doing CPR on someone out in the bar, and you know, we'd be in that room and there'd be readings. And we were making a series then at the end of the 80s and into the 90s where the academic would meet the street, because Seattle was a weird, post-Theodore Retke, it was like poetry on the page happened over there at the university. And then Red Sky Poetry Theater was doing really raw kind of chain-banging Jesse Bernstein stuff. And we were like, why can't those two worlds come together?
Yeah.
So the Rendezvous was like a little seedling for Hugo House. So Linda called me. I was living in New York briefly on a research fellowship, and she said, hey, let's make something. And she was from New Tech Money. And so she gave me like a venture capital amount and said, how much can you do with this? And I said, a lot. So I thought we would be starting something in the basement of like a Grange Hall where all literature begins, you know?
Very underground, yeah.
And then I moved back to Seattle to a mansion on the north end of Capitol Hill that Linda was renting, and the neighbors up there didn't like us. The property straddled 10th Avenue East and Federal, and the perception was that Cornish was already up there ruining the neighborhood with their filthy cigarettes and artists. And that if we allow a literary center, we're going to have like Jack Kerouac's, you know, reincarnation puking in the bushes or something. So it was like, get out of here.
Right.
So they sort of
all of art and love and cigarette butts.
It was crazy. So they kind of ran us out of the neighborhood, to be honest. And in doing so, created a groundswell of support, right? Because everybody was like, what a bunch of snobs. We want a literary center. So all of a sudden, all these people came to us and said, do it. So we felt all this ballast. It would have been like a $500,000 marketing campaign to get that much attention, right? So by running us out, they were doing us a favor, I think. Didn't feel like it at the time.
It's a blessing in disguise.
Whoa. So anyway, at that time, the owner of New City Theater, the building where Hugo House ended up, called Linda and said, I'm thinking of selling. And so she bought that building and shared the cost of it with another board member of the fledgling Hugo House, Linda Johnson.
So tell us about where the house was, your documentary.
Oh, man, I can't believe it's done. Woo, it takes a long time. Okay, this is like a naive arts project story. So I said to this class of seniors at the university, you know, Hugo House is getting torn down and I think we should make a little archival film about it. And then 4 years later, here it is. But whoa, was it a long process. So it's a documentary, it's 56 minutes. It has footage of Hugo from Onyx Smith's old film. It has footage of the teardown. It has footage of people who love Hugo House, some ghost evidence. It's got all this stuff to try to tell this story of how a poet's image can shape a city's vision in the arts.
Okay, so I do think you have a clip for us, right?
I do.
right.
I do. I have a trailer.
Oh, okay, all right. So
I know, isn't that totally pro?
That's very pro, and I'm actually super excited for it.
Thank you.
I know I have seen it before. I'm more super excited that other people get to see it, and then hopefully
thanks, Chikiva.
it'll be seen. All right, so let's take a moment to look at that trailer right now.
Once, I lived in a building that was named after a poet. He wrote poems about small towns and big rivers, about streams and bars. In the West, few writers then had audiences coast to coast. Actually, I think that the narratives were worn out. The same old stories of conquest, to take over the frontier, while the land belonged to indigenous people. Those stories were worn out. My apartment was above a cafe where poets and writers and actors performed on stage. We called the building Richard Hugo House. The building had once been a funeral home with a chapel. Afterwards, a couple of theaters took over, and by the time we moved in, we were starting a writer's center and naming it after Richard Hugo. It was my job to run the place. Writers felt comfortable here, like they could try out anything. I mean, you could spill stuff and no one would care. Physically spill, emotionally spill. Demolition is a sad prospect. You could scream, gentrification. People do. I understand. But think past the sentimental and imagine actually preserving the old place. Can you see it diminish next to the huge new buildings surrounding it? A spite house kept in defiance to the skyline? This is Seattle, a place to love whatever's left. My story is only one story. We remember places where we've lived, where we've moved from, and then the places are torn away. I guess we make art in the face of loss, out of those little fissures in our lives. With luck, we'll see some overlaps, some things coming into view, and we push things together until they make sense. That's what poets do. Only not exactly. Not exactly.
How'd you like it?
I thought it was great.
Okay,
like I
cool.
said, I have seen it before, but every time it just hits my heart because it has all the things that I'm just overwhelmed with nostalgia. It has all the things that I think Seattle is about at its core. And I love the music.
Oh,
I love the music.
Can I tell you a little story about the music?
Yes, tell me, yes.
Okay, this is like, we're gonna get to hidden talents later. I just love like the idea of ever being involved in a band. It's like one of my things. I have no musical gifts. Anyway, Wayne Horvitz, the unbelievable composer and musician who lives here in Seattle, called me and said, I want to take your Richard Hugo book and take it on a road trip and write music about the towns that you wrote about. So he took my book and he wrote the most beautiful music for each chapter in the book.
I didn't know that. Oh, God, this is so meta. This is like art on top of art.
Art coming out of Russian nesting dolls.
Yes, that's
Amazing.
the perfect thing. This
Okay.
documentary is a Russian nesting doll of art.
Right. So he makes this CD called Some Days Are Forever Afternoon. It is so beautiful, and it captures the spirit of the Hugo poems so beautifully. So then he calls me, he says, hey, want to go on tour with us and be the vocals? Okay, now this like just gets right to me. I was like, oh, are we going to be in a van? Can I smoke weed? What's going to happen, man? This is like it, you know? And he's like, no, Franny, it's not like that. It's like some kind of bad motels, and you're not going to be wanting to smoke weed, and just like get over that. But what you will do is stand up in every venue, and you'll read each poem, and then the band will play. So we traveled around the Northwest doing this, and it was so incredibly fun.
That sounds really awesome.
It was amazing. So then Wayne graciously gave us permission to use that music in the film. And then we also added Lori Goldston, who is a famous cellist here in Seattle. And we commissioned her to play in the old Hugo House in that very dry theater space. So she plays this cello that's just heart-wrenching. And there's a little kind of Hendrix moment where the building comes down in the film, and Lori Goldston's cello is behind it. That's all been engineered by Steve Fisk, who's just an amazing music producer. So, wow.
So I want to talk about the ghosts now.
Oh, the ghosts!
Because I love ghost stories. I so desperately want ghosts to be real. Fingers crossed, one day I'm going to be like home alone and there's just going to be a cup that floats and I'm like, I got you, ghost real.
Yeah.
But I want to hear your ghost story. I love hearing it. I want you to tell other people about it.
When Hugo House started, I worked there by myself, and the building was just disgusting. It was in terrible shape. It was like a great big ashtray, you know, and it just smelled bad, and stuff was damaged. And so I was sitting in my office, and a guy came out, and he had been living across the hall, a man who was without a home. And he said, I don't know, this place is pretty haunted. And he took his backpack and left. And that was like my first clue that something was going on. Then I was like trying to be really practical. Like I was trying to be a director, and I was pretty young and trying to do the right thing. So we had an air well in the old house that filled up with suicidal pigeons. And so the air well was like this chamber open to the sky, and pigeons would come in and just die. Okay, so it started to smell really bad, and it went all the way down to the basement. And I think they were probably waist deep in dead pigeons.
Oh, that's
so I was like, you know what? Let's get it cleaned up. So I called this guy, and I'll never forget it. I called several companies, like, do you guys clean out pigeons out of air wells? Right? No, not really. Anyway, this guy shows up, Gil, I'll never forget his name. And he's like, I got this. He's got the tool belt. He goes down there, and he starts shoveling out the pigeons, and a couple hours later he comes up, and all the color is drained out of his face, and he looks at me and he says, I don't know what's down there, but it's not human, it's not real, but it is real, and I'm leaving. And I was like, Gil, what is it? Looks like kind of a floating dead girl. And I was like, are you talking about a ghost? And he was like, look, I can't, I'm out of here. So, you know, this is like a manly man, tool belt, sensible, grounded, and he leaves. So I'm thinking, okay. Then, not long after, a woman was coming through Hugo House touring it with her friend. And I haven't told them about Gil. I mean, I just kind of let the Gil thing go by. And then they come up from the basement, and the visiting woman looks at me and says, you got a serious problem with a dead girl ghost down there.
And she says it's a girl, so you kind of know. It's like a pattern.
So then I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Right? Like two completely unrelated things. So then I started to get a little worried, and I don't believe in ghosts. But I thought, you know, you're a director now. You don't have to believe in ghosts. You just got to get rid of them. Right? Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So then I called a couple of wise friends, and they said, you need kind of an exorcism. You need a way for the ghost to want to leave. So at that time, Edge of the Circle bookstore was in our neighborhood with a Wiccan guy. The Wiccan guy came over with copper rods, and felt a lot of energy go through his arms when he went into certain parts of Hugo House. And he said, yeah, I think you have a dead girl. Zzz. So I put together an event where I had the priest from St. Joe's, a rabbi, and the Wiccan guy, and my friend Flor Fernandez, who's kind of a good voodoo person, and she's Haitian. They all came together to try to dispel the ghosts. And at that time I was working with a bunch of kids who didn't have homes, who were living in the park, and they were all excited about this, right? So they all came. And so we went through the house. It took hours to try to get the ghosts out, and the kids were just like
super into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they were like getting real worried, and the priest freaked out and left. He was like out of there when the Wiccan was doing his work. The Wiccan outlasted all of them, and the rabbi didn't show, so I'm just saying.
We are nearing the end.
Thank you.
I know.
Thanks for having me. What a blast.
It's both bittersweet, it's wonderful, and it's happy, but we are closing out this one with a game. So we can either do a nerdy puzzle or a hidden talent.
Oh no, I got hidden talents.
Oh, hidden talent?
Yes. I knew that you went to school in Pittsburgh.
Okay, yes, that's true.
So I wanted to do a hidden talent for you.
Okay.
Which is I can do a Pittsburgh accent.
Okay.
And I'm going to do 2 steps. I'm just going to give you the simple Pittsburgh accent, and then I'm going to give you the second one where I do a Pittsburgh accent punk version of Helen Reddy's Delta Dawn.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
I am so ready for this.
Hey, now, where are you going down there? You going to Permanis? Because the Stillers want a place is going to be crowded to the roof.
That is actually, for those of you who are not in Pittsburgh, that it's pretty spot
Yin's
on.
going down there.
Yin's.
Stillers.
And yeah, Stillers, not Ben Stiller, not
That
like
is
us and his
Stillers.
family. We're talking about the
They're
Pittsburgh
not winning
Steelers.
so much, yeah.
No, they're not.
And then the Permani brothers. That's where you go for that kind of thing. Okay, here's my, I wanted to be a musician, right? And I'm not allowed to be, and you'll know why in a second. Okay. Delta Dawn, what's that flower you got on? Could it be a faded rose from days gone by? And did I hear you say he was meeting you here today? Take you to that mansion in the sky.
This makes me so happy. I'm
May it bring you many viewers.
It'll bring me much joy, if nothing else. I don't know.
All right. Why not?
Frances McCue, thank you so
Thanks,
much for being
Jakiva.
a part
I totally
of this.
appreciate
You do win a prize, which is, drumroll on your laps.
Oh,
It
yes,
is.
I totally, give me that.
Yes, you can have it.
Want
It's a WordlitZine. It's a WordlitZine drawstring bag.
Yes.
There's also an archival issue in there, so you can read an
Thank
issue.
you, thank
Of course.
I
Thank
so
you so
admire
much.
this.
I'm glad. I love every time I get to sit down and talk to you. Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Jakiva.
much for being a
Thanks.
part. Ladies and gentlemen, Frances McCue. If you have not already seen the partner piece to this episode, Hugo House Now and Then, I highly encourage you to check out the previous one, which has Rob Arnold, who is the new kid on the block at Hugo House. He's the event coordinator, and he has a whole lot to share. Thank you guys so much for coming to see ZSides, and we will see you next time.
Bye.